In a galaxy ruled by power, mercy is a forgotten word. Planets burn, empires crumble, and the only law that matters: strength. If you're weak, you're dead. If you're emotional, you're a target. And if you're human, well, you don't last long out here. Alex was built for this universe. A living weapon, a gladiator forged in the deepest pits of an alien war machine. His silence is a shield, his rage is a blade. He doesn't speak unless it's with blood. He doesn't feel, because feelings get you killed. He's earned a name. In the underground arenas, they call him the Ghost, unbeatable, untouchable, unfeeling. And then she crashes into his world, Maya, a human, mouthy, defiant, infuriating. She talks too much, laughs too loud, questions everything. She's dragged into his cell like a discarded toy, just another prize for a beast like him. Only she doesn't scream, she doesn't beg, she stares at him, like he's the one who should be afraid. She's chaos wrapped in soft skin and wild eyes. A walking insult to everything he's built himself to be. And worst of all, she gets under his armor. She pokes, she prods, she pushes, and somehow she makes him want. Not just in the way a male wants a mate. No, she makes him feel anger, curiosity, hunger, obsession, for the first time in his brutal, blood-soaked life. He's not sure what he's fighting for anymore. Is it freedom, revenge, or is it her? Because Maya isn't just loud, she's alive. And in a world that demands silence, she dares to roar. This is the story of two beings who were never meant to collide. A weapon born of war, and a woman who refuses to break. What starts as irritation turns into fascination. What begins with chained fury ends in something feral, possessive, and unstoppable. This isn't your typical romance. It's teeth and fire, chains and choice. It's what happens when a grumpy alien gladiator meets a human hurricane and realizes too late he doesn't want her to shut up. He wants her to stay forever. In the arenas of the galaxy, the silence is as deafening as the bloodshed. For Alex, silence is survival. He was never supposed to be a person. He was born to be a weapon, forged in the fires of war, his very existence a product of brutality. The battlefield is his home, the roar of the crowd, his only acknowledgement. But in the depths of his mind, in the quietest moments between fights, Alex knows one truth. Emotions are liabilities. Weakness is death. As a gladiator, he's trained to show no fear, no hesitation, no mercy. His body is scarred from countless battles, each mark a reminder of what it takes to stay alive in a universe that devours the weak. His eyes, cold, calculating, scan his enemies like a predator. And when he strikes, it's swift. It's final. There is no second chance. To be human is to be a fool, a mistake. His people, his training, they taught him that. The weak don't last. And humans, they are the weakest of all. Alex doesn't care for their quirks, their need for affection, their endless chatter, their bizarre insistence on hope and love and connection. What do they know of survival, of sacrifice, of living through endless pain just to fight for another day? Nothing. They die too easily. They burn too bright. They fade too fast. But even in a galaxy built on violence and survival of the fittest, Alex is feared. The Ghost, silent, deadly, untouchable. The crowds chant his name, but it means nothing. Victory? Just another day of bloodshed. He's been fighting for years, and for what? Freedom, power, revenge? At this point, it's all just another fight, another kill, and yet, despite the brutal precision of his every move, despite the icy control that runs through his veins, there's something about this, his life, his choices, that's beginning to fracture. The weight of it is suffocating. And the only thing that keeps him going is the arena, the next fight, the next kill. But then, she arrives. Maya. She doesn't belong here, not in his world. She's loud, brash, and everything he's learned to despise. She's reckless, questioning, and somehow, impossibly, she dares to stand in his presence without fear. She refuses to cower, to obey the unspoken rules of their world. And in that she's the most dangerous thing Alex has ever encountered, her defiance. It irritates him. But something else stirs beneath the anger. She's a distraction, a disruption in the cold, perfect order of his life. And yet, for the first time, Alex finds himself wondering, what happens when the battle is no longer in the arena? What happens when the enemy isn't another gladiator, but the chaos she brings? He doesn't have the answers, but he can feel the tension growing like a storm on the horizon. And he knows, with an unsettling certainty, that he's not the one in control anymore. Maya wasn't supposed to be here. She didn't belong in the depths of an alien slave pit, not with her bright, brash humanity on full display. But here she was, shoved into a cell with nothing but the remnants of her defiance and a death sentence hanging over her head. And her first brilliant move? She stared him down. Alex, the ghost, a gladiator so feared the arena trembled with his name. And what does Maya do? She plants herself right in front of him and crosses her arms. She doesn't flinch, doesn't cower, doesn't even blink. "You're really tall," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "I bet you're really good at punching things. Tell me, is that all you've got?" Alex narrowed his eyes at the audacity. His fists clenched instinctively, but he didn't move. He never moved unless he had to. He wasn't used to this. The audacity of a human, so small, so fragile, walking into his personal space without a shred of fear or respect. It was infuriating. But worse? It was curious. "You don't know who I am," he growled. "You should." Maya just tilted her head, studying him like he was some kind of specimen. She wasn't afraid, not at all. And that, more than anything, made Alex uneasy. "Oh, I know exactly who you are," she said, tapping her chin like she was making a mental note. "You're the big broody guy who thinks scowling is a personality trait. I've seen your type before. Have you?" His voice was colder than a blizzard. "Yeah," she snorted. "You know the type. Serious, no nonsense. Thinks the world owes them something because they're strong. You're a dime a dozen. Big deal." Something in him snapped, but he bit it back. He was not going to let this ridiculous, annoying woman get under his skin. But no matter how hard he tried to ignore her, she kept poking, and poking, and poking. Maya had this way of breaking through the walls he'd spent his entire life building. Every word, every look, every challenge was like a hammer against his armor. She didn't respect him. She didn't fear him. And that made him want to do something he couldn't quite place. The worst part? She didn't even seem to care. "Oh, I get it," Maya continued, unfazed by his anger. "You're all big and scary, but inside, you're just like the rest of them, a slave to the system, fighting in arenas for someone else's entertainment. So what's the point, huh? Tell me, Gladiator, when's the last time you did anything for yourself?" He said nothing. Didn't need to. He didn't answer questions from people who weren't worth his time. But Maya wasn't done. "Just admit it. This whole silent warrior thing. It's a pity party wrapped in leather armor. Aren't you tired of it?" "Tired? Of her?" He stood there, fists clenched, barely holding onto his composure. Because for the first time, someone had asked him a question that made him think. Maya wasn't afraid of him. She didn't respect him. She didn't need him to be anything he pretended to be. And that was dangerous. Alex had fought battles in every corner of the galaxy, faced down enemies far deadlier than any human could imagine. and walked away with nothing but scars and blood-soaked memories. But none of it had prepared him for the chaos Maya brought into his life. Every encounter with her chipped away at the fortress he'd built around his heart, piece by piece. She was relentless, a whirlwind of noise and questions that didn't stop, didn't pause. And no matter how hard he tried to shut her out, she was always there, always present. Like a wound he couldn't ignore, a weight on his chest he couldn't shake. She was starting to get to him. It wasn't just the way she looked at him, eyes full of defiance, like she saw straight through the mask he wore. It was the way she acted, like his silence was nothing but a challenge to be answered. She didn't respect him. She didn't bow to him like the others did. No, Maya. Maya was different, and that, above all else, made her dangerous. One evening, after yet another long, blood-soaked day in the arena, he found himself standing outside her cell. He didn't know how he'd gotten there, didn't know why his feet had carried him to the place where she sat, her legs crossed, her head tilted up toward the stars like they meant something to her. For a moment, he just stared at her, watching. The soft glow of the artificial lights catch her face. Her wild hair, her defiant chin, the stubborn tilt of her lips. It made his chest tighten in ways he didn't want to admit. "You've been staring at me for the last 5 minutes." She called out, her voice flat but filled with that knowing smirk of hers. "Either you've got a problem, or you just like looking at my face. Which is it?" Alex didn't answer right away. Didn't need to. He wasn't sure what he was doing here, but he couldn't bring himself to leave either. And that realization stung more than any wound he'd ever suffered in the arena. "You talk too much," he muttered, crossing his arms, his stance rigid and defensive. Maya didn't back down. Of course she didn't. "I'd say you brood too much, but hey, that's kind of your whole thing, right?" Something in him snapped. But it wasn't rage. No, it wasn't that familiar burn of fury. This was different. This was something unsettling. "You have no idea what it's like," Alex bit out, his voice a low growl. He didn't mean to say it, didn't mean to. Let her in. But the words came out anyway, slipping past his control before he could stop them. This life, it isn't a choice. You think I chose this? You think I wanted to be this way?" Maya paused, her eyes flickering with something that could almost pass for understanding. Almost. "No," she said softly, "but you're still here. And you don't have to be." The silence stretched between them like a rope, taut and ready to snap. Alex swallowed hard, his chest tightening as something shifted inside of him. For the first time, he didn't want to be alone. He didn't want to be the silent, untouchable gladiator. And as much as he hated himself for it, he realized something else too. He didn't want her to be the one who saw through him. But Maya wasn't afraid of him, not in the way others were. She didn't fear the ghost. She challenged him, and that was the problem. "Why are you so persistent?" Alex finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper, like he was afraid to hear the answer. Maya looked up at him, her eyes softer now, quieter. "Maybe because deep down, I think you want someone to see you for who you really are, and I'm the only one who's not scared to see you." Alex froze, the weight of her words pressing against his chest like a physical force. He wanted to argue, to shove her away, but something inside him resisted. For once, he didn't want to be the ghost. He wanted to be Alex, and that scared him more than anything else. The arena roared with the sound of battle, the crowd's bloodlust echoing through the walls like a living, breathing entity. Alex, the ghost, stood at the center, the sand beneath his feet stained with the remains of the last fighter. Sweat trickled down his neck, his muscles sore from hours of brutal combat. His breath was steady, his mind clear, focused only on survival. He'd been in countless fights, each one a fight for his freedom, for his life, but this battle, it felt different. Maya had been watching from the stands, her sharp eyes locked on him as they always were, but this time, something was different in her gaze. The usual cocky smirk had been replaced with an intensity he couldn't place, a tension that cut through the air like a blade. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and he felt something tighten in his chest, something he couldn't explain, something unsettling. He'd spent years mastering the art of silence. His body was a weapon, his mind a fortress. But when Maya was around, it was like everything he'd ever known about himself started to unravel, thread by thread. She didn't just challenge him physically. She tested every part of him, every weakness he thought he'd buried deep down. The fight raged on, but Alex's mind was a million miles away. Maya's words, her presence, her defiance, they all circled around him, a whirlwind of noise that drowned out the roaring crowd. She was here, in the stands, watching him. And that was distracting. As the last opponent fell to the ground, defeated, Alex stood victorious, breathing heavily, his heart thundering in his chest. The crowd screamed for him, but he barely registered it. His gaze never left Maya. She was there, in the stands, eyes locked on him, her lips pressed together in something almost like concern. Or was it something else? The thought disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Later, in the quiet aftermath, Alex sat in the dark corner of the cell, his body aching, his muscles screaming for rest. The adrenaline from the fight still buzzed in his veins, but it was the ache in his chest that kept him awake. He had made it through the fight. Barely. But now that the arena's roar was gone, he was left alone with his thoughts. And the problem with that was simple. He couldn't stop thinking about her, Maya. She had no place in his life. She was a distraction, a loud, brash human who had no respect for the rules of this cruel world. She'd been thrust into this system, into his world, and yet, somehow she had survived. Not just physically, but emotionally. She was still here, still breathing, still defying everything he believed in. And now, for the first time, Alex felt something he hadn't in years, vulnerability. He wanted to shut it out, wanted to push it away. He wasn't supposed to care about a human, not one who had no concept of the dangers that surrounded them, not one who challenged everything he'd fought to maintain. But Maya didn't play by his rules. She never had. The door to his cell opened, the sound sharp and intrusive. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. Maya stepped inside, her eyes alight with that defiant spark he both hated and needed. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the darkness, the bloodstains on his armor, the tension in his posture. "You're a mess," she said, her voice low but tinged with something that almost felt like concern. Alex didn't respond immediately. He didn't know how to. How could he explain to her, to anyone, that for the first time in his life he was afraid? Afraid of what he might feel for her. Afraid of what she made him want to do. Maya stepped closer, her movements slow, deliberate. She didn't hesitate to close the gap between them. "I don't know what you're afraid of, but I do know this," she continued, her voice softer now, the usual bravado gone. "You're not as untouchable as you think." Her words sent a shiver down his spine, and despite himself, his chest tightened. "What do you want from me?" Alex finally asked, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. Maya's gaze flickered. To his lips for a split second, then back to his eyes. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing lightly over the edge of his armor, sending a jolt of electricity through his body. "I want to see you," she said simply. "All of you. Not the ghost, not the gladiator. Just you." Alex flinched. The vulnerability in her words hitting him harder than any blow in the arena. He was used to being a weapon, used to being feared. But Maya? She wasn't afraid of him. She wanted him to be something more. And that scared him more than anything. Daha. Next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty and tension. The arena was quieter now, the adrenaline of the last fight fading into the routine of survival. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Maya was everywhere. In the halls, in his thoughts, even in his dreams. Her words echoed in his mind like a constant drumbeat. I want to see you. It had been a simple statement, but it had struck him harder than any blow in the arena. She wanted to see him, the real him, not the weapon, not the ghost. And the idea of letting anyone see through the walls he'd built around himself, the walls forged in blood and betrayal, terrified him. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that he didn't want to push her away anymore. Later that evening, the arena had emptied, and the dust from the battles had settled into the ground. Alex stood alone in the practice room, his fists still bruised from the day's fight. His chest heaved with exertion, but his mind was elsewhere. It was always elsewhere when she was near. He couldn't focus, couldn't block her out. And that damnable pull toward her, the way she made him feel alive in ways he hadn't thought possible, was eating at him, gnawing at his insides. He heard the door creak open. Without looking, he knew it was Maya. I thought you might be. Here, she said, her voice light but sharp, like she was playing a game she didn't fully understand. You're always alone after a fight, huh? Alex didn't answer immediately, his back still to her as he wiped the sweat from his brow. His hands clenched into fists, but not in anger. It was something else, something darker. He could feel her gaze on him, could practically feel the weight of her stare pressing into his skin. It made his pulse quicken, his heart hammer against his ribs. I don't need you here, he finally said, his voice low and flat. He wasn't sure why he said it. He didn't want her to leave. He wanted to push her away, but something inside him didn't have the strength to do it anymore. Maya didn't flinch. She never did. Instead, she took a step closer, her boots clicking softly against the stone floor. She was close enough now for him to feel her presence, the warmth of her body just inches from his. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't afraid of anything. Maybe you don't, she replied, her voice almost a whisper. But that doesn't mean I won't be here anyway. Alex turned to face her then, his eyes burning with something dangerous, something hungry. He tried to keep his guard up, tried to maintain control, but he was losing the battle. Maya had chipped away at him piece by piece, and now there was nothing left but raw need and burning frustration. You don't understand, he growled, his voice strained. He stepped closer, invading her space, his chest heaving with the force of his emotions. This thing between us, it's not supposed to happen. You're a human. You don't belong here. I'm not the kind of man you think I am. Maya's gaze softened, but there was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation. She stepped into his personal space with a boldness that nearly took his breath away. I don't need you to be anything but you, she said, her voice steady. And I don't need you to protect me from your demons. I know exactly what I'm getting into. You're afraid, Alex, but it's not of me. It's of you. Her words sliced through him like a blade. The truth of them, raw and unfiltered, hit him harder than any of his opponents in the arena. She was right. He was afraid. Afraid of what he felt for her. Afraid of what she made him want. Before he could respond, Maya reached up, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of his jaw, tracing the hard line of his face as though she had every right to be here, touching him, seeing him. The warmth of her touch spread through him, burning away the last of his resolve. Maya, he whispered, his voice thick with something he couldn't define. The need to resist was still there, buried deep down, but it was fading fast. She wasn't backing away. She wasn't running from him like everyone else did. She was staying. Her fingers lingered, and the touch seemed to electrify every inch of him. He couldn't take it anymore. He reached out, his hand curling into the back of her neck, pulling her closer until their faces were inches apart. For a heartbeat, everything stood still. Then, with a growl of frustration, he kissed her. It was
fierce. It was wild. It was a collision of everything they had been avoiding, a battle of wills, of instincts, of everything they hadn't said, but both knew to be true. Maya's arms wrapped around his neck, her body pressing against his, and
Alex felt something inside him snap. This wasn't a fight anymore. This wasn't about control. This was about need, about desire, about belonging. And for the first time in his life, he realized he didn't want to fight it. The morning after was a blur of confusion and regret. Alex lay awake, his body still humming with the residual heat of their kiss. His heart was pounding, his mind racing. He couldn't recall a time when he had felt this vulnerable, this exposed. The woman who had come into his life like a storm had torn down every wall he'd spent years building. And for what? He cursed under his breath as he sat up, his mind grappling with the chaos of his emotions. Maya. Her name lingered in his thoughts, like a fever he couldn't shake. The mere memory of her touch, of her defiance, had the power to unravel everything inside him. He got to his feet, pacing back and forth in the dim light of his quarters. The cool stone floor beneath his boots offered little comfort. Nothing could. Outside, the world was as brutal and unforgiving as ever. The arena beckoned, a constant reminder of his purpose, his fight for survival. But now, the thought of it filled him with a hollow sense of futility. What was the point of winning, of surviving, if Maya wasn't part of the equation? He had never thought of anyone else before. His focus had always been razor sharp, his sole goal to remain untouchable, unbeatable. But now he wasn't sure what he wanted anymore. Maya wasn't any better off. The night had been a mess of emotions, a whirl of heat and tension that had spiraled out of her control. She had expected the kiss, expected the connection, the electric charge between them, but she hadn't expected the aftermath. She didn't regret it, not in the slightest. She could still feel the scorch of his lips on hers, the way his body had pressed against hers with a hunger she hadn't known existed beneath his hardened exterior. But something had shifted. She could feel the walls he had built around himself snap back into place, cold and unyielding. The moment they had shared felt like a crack in his armor, and she wasn't sure if it had made her want to push further in or run the other way. Now she stood alone in the empty hallway outside his quarters, unsure of what to do next. The other gladiators moved past her, too preoccupied with their own lives to notice her standing there, staring at the door as though it might open on its own accord. She didn't know what to expect. Part of her had thought he would be waiting for her, a fierce look in his eyes, a challenge in his stance. But now, as the minutes stretched on, she realized she wasn't sure what she was looking for. She wasn't even sure what she wanted from him. She turned on her heel and walked away, her footsteps echoing through the silence of the compound. Alex didn't see her the entire day. He threw himself into his training, pushing his body to the limits in a futile attempt to shut out the thoughts of Maya. The sweat on his skin, the ache in his muscles, the sharpness of the pain. It was all easier to handle than the turmoil building inside him. But even as he fought, as he punched and kicked and bled, he knew that it wasn't enough. He could never outrun his feelings for her. Maya had crept under his skin in a way he didn't think possible, and it terrified him. His training session ended early, the sounds of the arena fading as he walked back to his quarters. He was avoiding her. He knew it. He couldn't face the mess they had made of everything. But then, as he reached the door to his cell, he saw her standing in the hallway. Her back was turned, but her presence hit him like a physical blow. There was a distance between them now, something cold and unspoken that made his chest tighten. Maya, the woman who had walked into his world and turned it upside down. His heart pounded harder as he approached, his feet moving on their own accord. He didn't know what he was doing, but it didn't matter. All he could see was her. "Maya," he called, his voice softer than he intended. She froze, her body stiffening, before she slowly turned around. The look in her eyes was a mixture of hurt and determination, two emotions that had no business colliding in a place like this. "Alex," she said, her voice flat, but there was a tremor beneath it. "We need to talk." He nodded, but the words lodged themselves in his throat. What could he say? What should he say? Before he could speak, she took a step toward him. "This thing between us, it can't just be a moment. It's not just some fight, some explosion of passion. We can't pretend it didn't happen. I won't let you." The words hit him harder than any physical blow. She wasn't going to let him run away. "I don't know what you want from me, Maya," he said, his voice strained. "I don't know what any of this is anymore. I'm not the kind of man you think I am. I'm not someone you can fix. I don't need to fix you," she interrupted, her voice low but unwavering. "I just need you to stop pushing me away. I need you to let me in." For a long moment, they stood there, neither one of them moving. It felt like the entire galaxy was holding its breath. Finally, Alex spoke, his voice a whisper. "I don't know how to do that." The arena was a cacophony of noise, a storm of blood and sweat, roars and cheers, and the unmistakable scent of battle. Alex stood at the edge of the pit, his body still bruised from his last fight, but his focus was sharper than ever. His muscles burned with exhaustion, but his mind was somewhere else entirely, somewhere far away, in the presence of a woman who had slipped past every guard he had ever set up. Maya. It had been days since their last confrontation in the hall, since her words had hit him like a slap across the face. She had come at him with all the defiance she could muster, and in return, he had recoiled. But now, there was no escaping it, no avoiding the truth. He couldn't stop thinking about her. She had refused to walk away, and in some strange, undeniable way, he realized that he hadn't wanted her to. As the last gladiator was thrown to the ground, the crowd erupted into a frenzy of cheering. Alex, still standing in the shadows of the arena, forced himself to focus. He couldn't afford to be distracted, not now, not in a place like this. But as the sound of the crowd faded into a dull hum in his ears, his thoughts turned back to her. The door to his quarters creaked open behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He had been expecting this. "Maya," he said, his voice rough as it escaped his throat. "You know, I don't take orders well," she said, stepping into his line of sight, her hands planted firmly on her hips, her eyes glinting with defiance. She wasn't here to apologize. He knew that much, and for some reason, he respected her even more for it. Her presence was like fire in his chest, a searing heat that only made him more conflicted. Every instinct told him to push her away, but another part of him, the part that hadn't been alive in years, wanted to pull her closer. "You've got a funny way of proving that," he said, unable to keep the hint of a smirk from his lips. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a few steps forward, the air between them thick with the unspoken understanding that something was about to break. The space between them crackled with tension. "Stop running from this," she finally said, her voice quieter now, but still firm. "I'm not afraid of you, Alex, and you're not going to scare me off." His heart thudded in his chest. Scare her off? What was he afraid of? That she would leave? Or that she would stay and tear him apart? "I'm not the man you think he muttered, his voice low. "I'm a killer, Maya. I was born for this. All I've ever known is violence and bloodshed, and you're nothing like me. You're loud, you're reckless. You don't fit into this world. You never will." Her lips parted, but she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes softening, though the fire never fully left them. "I don't need to fit in your world," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not here to be a part of your past. I'm here because I want to be here. I'm here because I see you. Not the fighter, not the killer, but the man underneath all of that. The man you keep buried so deep that you don't even know he's there." His breath hitched. Her words were like a dagger, sharp and cutting, but they pierced through the armor he had spent years building around his heart. "You think you know me, Maya?" He was angry, his fists clenching at his sides, but there was no real malice behind it. Only fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what she had awakened in him. "You think I want you here? You're just a distraction. An inconvenient, reckless distraction." "I'm not going anywhere, Alex," she said, her voice unwavering, her gaze never leaving his. "I'm staying, and you're going to have to deal with that." The tension in the room was unbearable, the weight of their words pushing them both to the brink of something explosive. And then, for the first time since meeting her, Alex allowed himself to reach out. His hand shot out to grasp her arm, pulling her closer, his grip rough but desperate. His heart hammered in his chest, and in that moment, all the walls he had built came crashing down. Maya didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped into his embrace, her body pressing against his. Her breath was warm against his skin, and for the first time, Alex didn't want to let go. "I don't know what to do with you," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never felt anything like this. You make me feel alive." She finished for him, her hand resting on his chest, her fingers tracing the hardened ridges of his armor. "I make you feel human." He nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah." And for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing, the heat between them, and the undeniable pull of something neither of them could resist any longer.